imaginary numbers. It has a lot to do with what we've been doing. So go to your calculator and type in the square root of -9. Probably going to get an error because you can't take the square root of a negative number. Because I cannot multiply one number, I can't do a number times itself and get a -9. -3 times -3 is still +9. So that's where imaginary numbers come in. A couple things that you need to know. You need to know that I is the square root of -1. And you need to know that I squared is -1. Two things that you just absolutely need to remember. When we simplify square roots that have a negative number, it's almost identical to what we've been doing. There's just one extra step. So, for example, when I get to the square root of -9, I'm going to take out that negative. And so I'm going to split this up into -1 and 9. The square root of -1, the square root of 9. Because -1 times 9 is -9. Is 9 a perfect square?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So what did I tell you was the square root of -1? I. What is the square root of 9? 3. When you write your answer, it's kind of like I is just a variable. You want to put the number in front. So my answer is 3i. Negative underneath everything except your answer will have an I with it. So number 2, the square root of -1. Is 196 a perfect square? Yeah, it is. What's the square root of -1? What's the square root of -1? I. And the square root of 196? 14. So my answer is 14i. Number 3, get my -1 out. I'm left with 5. Is 5 a perfect square? Nope. Can you divide 5 by any of the perfect squares? No, nothing other than 1. So you cannot break this down anymore. But this, the square root of -1, is I. And anything that can't be broken down, just bring it down. When you have a square root, that is always put at the end because you don't want it to look like the I is underneath. So the I actually goes in front here. Let's go on to the square root of -80. I'm going to get my -1. Is 80 a perfect square? Nope. Can you divide 80 by any of the perfect squares? Yes, you can. So go ahead and we're going to split that up. So you can take, okay, 80 divided by, I might start at 49. 80 divided by 36. 80 divided by 25. 80 divided by 16. There it is. So it's 16 and 5. What is the square root of negative 1? What's the square root of 16? 4. Square root of 5? Just bring it down. So the correct order to write your answer is 4i square root of 5. It's always just your whole number first, then I, and then your square root. Let's do number 5. Getting that negative out. Do we need to split up the 32? Yep. What's the largest perfect square that goes into 32? 16 times 2. Good. So I've got I, 4 again, and then bring down the square root of 2. So my answer is 4i square root of 2. I want you to try number 6. Your answer should be 8i square root of 3. Any questions? Now these next 4, we're going to be solving the quadratics, which means we're actually finding the x-intercepts, which means we do need to put the plus or minus in the front, and we do it just like we did the last lesson. So if I have x squared plus 81 equals 0, what would I do first? Subtract the 81, which gives me x squared equals negative 81. Then what? Square root. Could you tell what this one is going to be without splitting it up? What is it? Not just 9. It's 9i. Whenever you have a negative under your square root, your answer has to have the negative, or it has to have the I. So it's x equals plus or minus 9i. If you have a perfect square, you may not need to kind of actually split it up. So number 8, 2x squared plus 9 equals 1. I'm going to subtract 9. And that gives me 2x squared equals negative 8. And then divide by 2. X squared equals negative 4. And then I take the square root. And what's the square root of negative 4? 2i. Equations, you have to put plus or minus. Let's do number 9. I'm going to subtract 15 first. What does that give me? Negative 24. And then divide by 4. x squared equals negative 6. And then I take the square root. Is 6 a perfect square? No. Can you divide 6 by any perfect squares? No. So I am going to bring out the negative 1, but the 6 is just going to stay. So it's going to be plus or minus I square root of 6. And we'll do one more. Subtract the 13. That gives us x squared equals negative 12. And then take the square root. Now this one, 12 is not a perfect square, but you can divide it by a perfect square. So you definitely need to break this one up. What perfect square goes into 12? 4. 4 times 3. This is I. This is 2. Can't do anything with the square root of 3. Are there any questions? Now let's go back to this page. And we're going to do some things with I using exponent rules. I'm going to give you I to some power, and you're going to simplify that. When you have I to any power, I to the 500th power, whatever it is, you can simplify it to one of 4 answers. Either 1 or negative 1, I or negative I. I to any power will simplify to one of those 4 things. And I'm going to show you how to simplify it. But first, we need to review the exponent rules, because you need to know those. What is x squared times x to the 5th? X to the 7th. Good. What is x to the 4th to the 3rd power? It is x to the 12th. You multiply the exponents. So what if I wanted to fill in this blank? X squared to some power gives me x to the 30th. What would go in the blank? 15, because you multiply the exponents. 2 times 15 equals 30. And then also, what did I tell you that I was? Square root of negative 1, and I squared is negative 1. So knowing all of those things, we are going to manipulate and simplify these 4. The first 2 have even exponents. That's important. They have even exponents. It's a teensy bit easier, one less step when they have an even exponent. Since we know that I squared is negative 1, that's a pretty easy number to work with. I am going to rewrite this so that I have I squared to some power. And what power would that need to be? It would need to be the 6th power, because 2 times 6 is 12. Do you know what I squared is? It's negative 1. So this is the same thing as having negative 1 to the 6th power. And you can type that in your calculator. Just make sure you put the parentheses. Negative 1 to the 6th power is 1. So I to the 12th power is 1. And so number 12, that is an even exponent. So I can do it the same way. I squared to some power. It would need to be the 15th power. And the reason I do that is because I can replace the I squared with negative 1. And I can get rid of the I completely. And negative 1 to the 15th power is negative 1. So I to the 30th is the same thing as negative 1. Now 13 and 14, these have odd exponents. So you have one step at the beginning extra that you need to do. This that we did up here with the exponents only works with an even one. Do you agree that I to the 35th is the same thing as having I to the 1st times I to the 34th? Are those the same thing? Your exponent rules? Because you add 1 and 34. So now I can just bring down this I. It doesn't go away, you just got to keep bringing it down. And then now I can do this I squared to some power. What power would that need to be? 17. Yep. So this is I times negative 1 to the 17th power. What is negative 1 to the 17th power? It is negative 1. So this is I times negative 1. Which is what? Negative times I. What's that? Negative 1I. Just negative I. Okay. And last one we're going to do of these. It's another odd exponent. So you've got to bring one of the i's out so that we can use exponent rules. If I take one of the i's, I'm left with 44. So what would go in my blank? 22. So I times negative 1 to the 22nd power. And what is negative 1 to the 22nd power?
1.
It's 1. And I times 1 is I. So no matter what power of I that I give you, you're going to have one of these 4 answers. If it's an even exponent, it'll either be 1 or negative 1. If it's an odd exponent, it'll be I or negative I. All right, we have 4 more questions that we're going to do. And you need to know those powers of I for these questions. So what if I multiply, and we're going to use your typical multiplication, just as if this was 4x times 7. 4i times 7i. 28i squared. 7 times 4 is 28. I times I is I squared. But what do we know that I squared is? Negative 1. So this is 28 times negative 1, which is negative 28. Number 16, you need to multiply negative 4 times 2 times negative 9. And what do you get? 72. And then I have I to what power? I to the 3rd power. Well, we're going to have to do what we did up here. So I to the 3rd, I'm going to go to the side. I to the 3rd. I can take one I out, leaving me with I squared. What do I know that I squared is? So this is I times negative 1, which is negative I. So this is 72 times negative I, which is negative 72I. Let's do number 17. When you have like 2i to the 6th, then all of that is raised to the 3rd power. You've got to do 2 to the 3rd power. What is 2 to the 3rd power? 8. And then what is I6 to the 3rd power? I to the 18th times 5i. So when I multiply those two, I get 40i to the 19th. I've got to go over to the side and figure out what I to the 19th is. we would break it down into I and I to the 18th. And then just keep bringing down that I all the way. And this would become I squared to the 9th, which is negative 1 to the 9th, which is negative 1. So I to the 19th is negative I. And you always want to write your negative sign in the front. So negative 40I. See if you can do number 18. Alright, so from this step, I first got rid of my exponents. 3 squared is 9, and then I had I squared. Then I have negative 8 squared is 64, I squared. Now you could have turned this into 576 I to the 4th. That would have been fine, and then went to the side and broke down your I to the 4th. But I think that's harder. When I see I squared, I automatically think that's negative 1. So I just went ahead and turned those I squareds into negative 1s. And then when you multiply all that out, you get 576.
Why is it so negative?
9 times negative 1 times 64 times negative 1. This 64 has to be positive.